The parasha of this morning is known as Parasha Vayetze, and which we can see, which means and he went out to live. You know, in this parasha we see that Yaakov left his parents' home to go and seek a wife for himself. This morning parasha is known as Parasha Vayetze, and it means to live. Parasha Vayetze tells of Yaakov leaving home at the command of his parents, of Yitzhak and Rivka, on Pesach in the year 2171, and going to his wicked uncle Laban in Haran to get married. On his way, he had a dream at Bethel, which means the house of God, of angel ascending and descending a ladder. In Padan Aram, Yaakov married Laban's two daughters, Rahel and Leah, and their concubines, Bilhah and Zilpah, for whom he had worked 14 years. Yaakov amassed great wealth against all the odds, and has 11 children there. After 22 years in Haran, and after Joseph is born, Yaakov decided it is time to leave and return home to the land of Canaan. As we shall see, Yaakov's success against his uncle's plan to destroy him, both psychologically and physically, through sorcery and trickery, is due to his great faith in Adonai and his observance of Torah, which he had learned all his life, and especially in the 14 years at the yeshiva of Eber, where he had hidden after fleeing from his brother Esau. At the end of the parasha, Yaakov left Laban's house, a very wealthy man. He had destroyed Laban from within and was now ready to take on Esau in the head-on confrontation in the parasha that is going to follow next week. That is Parasha Vayetze. What am I trying to say here? We can see in this parasha that this parasha is extremely rich. It has a lot of connotation, a lot of things. There's a lot of life exemplary in this parasha that we have to take in our own personal life. We see who Laban was in the book of Bereshit, just to give us a glance of who is Laban. In the book of Bereshit, chapter 24, I'm going to read. In the book of Bereshit, chapter 24, chapter 24 from verse 29 to 31. Verse 29 to 31, it reads, Rebekah had a brother whose name was Laban. Laban ran to the man outside of the spring, for upon seeing the nose ring and the bracelet on his sister's hand, and upon his hearing his sister Rebekah's word, saying, Thus as the man spoken to me, he approached the man who was still standing by the camel by the spring. He said, Come, O blessed of Hashem, O blessed of the Holy One, why should you stand outside when I have cleared the room or the house and the place for the camel? Laban was a thief, because as upon seeing the nose, the gold ring and the bracelet of gold of what? Of 10 shekel of gold that the servant of Abraham has given to the sister Rebekah. He saw the gold, his eye was like this, boom, oh wow, this must be a good wealth, this is riches. So he ran to meet him. Laban, from the beginning, was a thief, and is a thief still today. So we have to put that in consideration, understand that. So, and again, we can also see that Yaakov running away from his problem, that does not make the problem to run away from him. We might run away from all our problems. We might put our head in the sand like ostrich. I don't see anything. I don't want to see anything. By the time you put your head up, the problem is standing, is still by you. The problem does not run away. The problem does not go away. By you running, that does not mean that the problem will leave you alone. No. We are going to see that next week, that you have to face your problem by yourself. You have to face that problem head on. We saw that Jacob faced Esau head on. You can run forever. You can run as much as you can. But your problem is always by your side. Your problem is like a shadow. It follows you everywhere. Except the day you decide, say, yes, enough is enough. I will no longer sin again. I'm not this type of person. I am a good man. I know that my being, my spirit, my soul is a good man. And I want to be a good man. I have to stop this right now and now. You have to decide. Jacob decided. And he took his decision and he followed his decision. Jacob's journey to Haran and his existence and survival in Haran can only be understood as a truly metaphysical phenomenon above the realm of the natural. He was sent angelic protection from Adonai from the 8th sphere on his journey out and on his journey coming back home. This is the significance of the dream that he had at Bethel. Jacob departed to Haran with all the 8 blessings that his father Isaac had given him in the previous parasha, including the blessing of Abraham. All those blessings being conditional on the one blessing that Esau received for him, that he, Jacob, observed the Torah. Jacob Jacob was to need them all to survive in the house of Laban. All the Torah that he has been taught by his mom, all the Torah that he has been taught in the yeshiva at Eva, all these years that he has been running away from Esau, his brother, because he doesn't want to be killed by his brother Esau. His mom has been teaching him the Torah, the commandment, the basic survival skill of life. And this is now for him to do what, to be able to put all what he has learned into practice. We can be learning a lot of things every Shabbat. We can be learning a whole lot of things in our life. But if we don't put it into practice, it's nothing. It has no benefit for us. If you learn and become the greatest professor in the world, but what you learn from the university, what you learn from your study, if you cannot put it into practice, then what is it for you? It's nothing. You're just wasting your time. So therefore, we as a child of God, we as Israel has to put into practice what we learn, what we are learning, what the Torah is teaching us. We have to put into practice the word of the Torah. Jacob, fleeing from the threat of his brother Esau, was alone in the desert, homeless and penniless. That night, he slept on the desert floor. And when he awoke, he prayed to God for safety and his basic necessity. His simple prayer ended with the pledge, "All that you give me, I will tithe to you." Jacob's request was not for money per se. He pledged that all that God gives him, he will give a portion of it back to the Holy One. Most of us will say, you know what, God, I'm working just a simple work. My work is I'm just receiving $10 an hour, or I'm just receiving $5 an hour. I have to pay my rent, I have to do this and that, so therefore I cannot tithe. I don't have enough. Because you have spoken in your mind that you don't have enough, you will never have enough. It will never be enough, because you have that mentality in your mind that it is not enough. But when you say, God, I have $1 and this $1 is enough and I'm going to tithe from this $1, you will always have enough. We can remember from the story of the Shunammite woman in the book of the Kings. When the woman ran unto Elisha and he said, "Oh, the servant, my husband, died. and he has a loan. He has taken a loan, and now the people has come to take my son as well as a slave to pay for the loan of their fathers, which is legally their right. But he said, but your servant, my husband, your servant, the servant of God, loved Hashem, and he did everything as he can, but now he's dead. Elisha said, what do you have in the house? He said, I have just a jar. I said, what else do you have in the house? He said, I have an oil. He said, okay, take your son, enter into the room, go unto your neighbor, borrow all kinds of jars, enter the house, lock the door, and begin to pour until when all the jar is full. Then he did exactly according to the word of the man of God. He went, borrowed all the jars from his neighbor or from our neighbor, brought them into our room, and our children closed the door, and she begins to pour, and she pour and pour and pour until all the jars were full. And the Torah said, and when the jars were all filled, the one that she was pouring from stopped. It stopped because it was all complete. Because she had, and then she came back into the man of God, said everything is done. The man of God said, okay, take the jar, sell them, sell all those oil, pay the debtors, pay them back, and the rest use this to survive. If we don't have the mentality, if we don't change our mind, we have to understand that the wave of our mind generates into the heavens. It grows into the heavens because we say we don't have, it will never have. Because you have pronounced from your mind that you don't have. But when you begin to pronounce from your mind that I have, even though it is $1, God will multiply that $1 millions of times. And those that have millions, they will never have. But you that have only one will have enough. It will never end. It will continue. God will continue to increase it because you have in your mind that I have. That is the basic necessity. Yaakov prayed for a basic necessity. God, if you will protect me to and from this journey, if you will give me bread and give me clothes, all what you are giving me, I will come to tithe unto you. It didn't say, God, if you make me a billionaire. It didn't say, God, if you make me the CEO of TD Bank. If God, if you make me the CEO of Microsoft. God, you have to make me like the richest man in the world. Then I will serve you. But if I don't have, I can serve you. Yaakov just prayed for the basic things, the basic necessity. And what did God do? God multiplied him more. That woman was just looking for a basic thing to pay the debtors back. But God multiplied her mightily. This morning, this is just the welcome, okay? And because this morning we are going to discuss about the man, Yaakov. We are going to discuss about breeding leaders. To breed leaders. And we're going to also talk about Judah and Israel. And we're going to talk about anti-Semitism. So let's start. Yaakov went out from Beersheba and he went to Haran. Genesis chapter 28 verse 10. The story of Yaakov's journey to Haran is the story of every soul descending to the physical world. I repeat again. The story of Yaakov's journey to Haran is the story of every soul descending to the physical world. How is that so? The soul too leave behind the spiritual idol of Beersheba, the spiritual place where the soul was created. The soul have to leave that place to come into the physical world by inhabiting a physical body, right? And Beersheba literally means well of seven. Beersheba means well of seven, a reference to the supernal source of the seven divine attributes or Sephiroth, from which all souls are derived. And journey to Haran, which literally means wrath. The meaning of Haran meaning wrath, anger. A desolate place, a hard place, a place of lies, a place of deception, a place of struggle, and a place of hardship, a place in which material consume one's days and nights, sapping one's energy, confusing one's priority, and all but obscuring the purpose for which one has come there in the first place. That is the meaning of Haran. A place where all your attention is only on the physical, where all your attention is only on the material. A place where what you see, your eyes, is consumed by materialism. A place where you cannot even concentrate in your spiritual life. A place where 24 hours is only work, as it is said in North America. Time is money. Everything's about money, materialism. But I have to work. In the United States, it is even like it's becoming like a taboo for you to take your legally vacation. They look at you as if you are like you're a lazy person. This is a vacation that is due to you legally. It is like a taboo for you to take your vacation, because you have to work your entire life. What type of a world is that? What type of life are you living, or are we living? When all our life is only about money and work. Where is the break? When the Torah talks about the Shabbat, that you have to have one day rest, recalculate yourself again. Reboot yourself again before you go to work the next week. Have a time for your family, for your husband, for your wife, for your children. Rejoice in the salvation of the living God. But no, it's all about work. And when we break down and with too much stress, people start committing suicide. That is the consequence of their actions. Yet, it is in Haran, in the employ of Laban the deceiver, not in the Holy Land, and in his tent of learning, that Jacob funds the nation of Israel. It is here that he marries and fathers 11 of the 12 sons who will become the 12 tribes of Israel. As Jacob remained in the Holy Land, the life of this pure scholar who lived 3,500 years ago will have been of no significance to us today. Facing the consequence of our action, we can see in the book of Bereshit chapter 27, verse 11 to 13. I want us to read a particular version there. Bereshit chapter 27, verse 11 to 13. Bereshit 27, verse 11. Jacob replied to Rebekah, his mom, "But my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I am a smooth-skinned man. Perhaps my father will feed me, and I shall be a mocker in his eyes. I will thus bring upon myself a curse rather than the blessing." But his mother said to him, "Curse be on me, my son. Only heed my voice and go fetch them for me." I repeat, she said, "Your curse be on me, my son. Only heed my voice and go fetch them for me." A deceiver being deceived. Jacob was a deceiver. He deceived his brother to steal the blessing of his brother. Now he's facing the consequence of his action in the house of his uncle Laban. A deceiver being deceived. You see, we can see from this verse that what Jacob did, Jacob himself, in his soul, in his heart, in the deepest part of his soul, it is contrary to who he is. Jacob doesn't want to deceive nobody. That action is contrary to his personality. We can see here from this verse, he was saying, "Mom, if I do this, instead of me bringing blessing for myself, it's going to be a curse. I don't want to do it. Mom, it is not right." But his mom forced him. He said, "Let that curse be on me. Just go do exactly as I told you." And we understand that Jacob is mommy's son. He loved his mom so much, and his mom loves him so much. He is a type of a son that listens to the voice of his mom. His mommy's baby's boy. So we can see the personality of Jacob, that Jacob was forced contrary to his being to do these things. But anyway, he did it, and we can see the consequence of the action. Jacob faced the consequence for 15 years of this terrible thing that he has done. He was deceived by his own uncle, who is Laban. The soul also achieved its endurance significant only upon its descent into Haran. The soul too achieves its enduring significance only upon its descent into Haran. Only as a physical being invested within a physical body and inhabiting a physical environment can it fulfill the purpose of its creation, which is to build a dwelling place for God in the physical world. The soul comes from the heaven, right, into the physical body. It's infused. It said in the word in the physical body, and the physical body is called Haran, and is then born into the physical world. It has to undergo a lot of things. It has to undergo a lot of refinement. Our soul, our being has to undergo a lot of trials, a lot of tribulation, a lot of tests, a lot of things for us to be clean, for us to be ready to be used by the Holy One. If our soul, if our mind, if our soul is not being refined, how can we say that we are ready for the task ahead? There is a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of examination to be given, because if we learn the Torah all our years and there is no examination, how can the professor know that the student is doing fine? The student can only prove that they are doing fine only by giving a perfect examination, right? That is the same thing the Holy One, blessed be He, is doing for us. God as a professor, He taught us the Torah and the type of examination. Of course, no student like examination say, oh, it's hard, it's tough. But when we do it right, when we understand the Torah and we put it into practice, by the time the examination comes, it won't be as hard as that. Now, breeding leaders. I said ladder equal DNA. Ladders equals DNA, pictorially. If we picture DNA is twisted, right? If we picture it as if it is plain, we can see that DNA is resemble a ladder. It's like a ladder. We can see why our father Jacob was a breeder. Sheep, you wouldn't think they could play a major role in determining our leaders, but they did. The Midrash said that one of Moshe's defining acts that moved God to choose him as the leader of Israel was his attitude towards his father-in-law's flocks. Once an air wandered from the pack, and Moshe scoured the desert to find it. He finally found the pack and an exhausted creature, and he fed and carried her back to the rest of the flock. God was impressed. On the way home, Moshe saw a very fascinating sight, a burning bush, and the rest was history. The way you act to your dog, the way that you act to your creature, the way that you act to your goat, to your ram, to your animals that you have in your home. If you act good unto them, how much more unto human being? If you act wicked unto them, then the same thing you are going to act even more wicked to human being. That is what the Torah is saying. The way you act to those animals that you care for, the way you care for your animals, if you can care for them with all your life, with all your soul, with all your spirit, then how much more human being? That is what God is saying. We can see that flocks has a lot of things in the Torah concerning us, the Hebrews. We are a people of husbandry. We do animals. We are shepherds. That is who we are. That is our life. And that is what God is saying, that He is going to make us to be the shepherd of the world, to shepherd the entire universe, to shepherd the physical world, to bring all His sheep, all the rest 17 nations back unto Him. King David was also a shepherd. The Midrash tells us that David handling the sheep was also the impetus for God to choose him to lead his flock. David had a very calculating grazing system. First, he will allow only the young sheep to pasture. They will eat the tenderest grass. After they finished, David allowed the older sheep to graze. In this manner, the tougher middle grass was left for those sheep with stronger jaws. The Midrash tells us that God was impressed with David's ability to discern the different needs of varying age groups and foresaw in those actions the leadership quality needed to be the king of Israel. So much for the career of two of our greatest Israeli leaders as shepherd. What troubled me in this week Torah portion was of this Torah portion, which contained a long episode that also deals with sheep. It expands in detail exactly how Jacob manipulated genetics and had the acumen to cultivate an amazing large and diverse flock. However, I am troubled. What is a long narrative of seemingly inconsequential breeding techniques detailed so intricately? The Torah spent nearly 20 verses on a half-dozen variety of sheep color and explained how Jacob bred them. Why are such seemingly insignificant breeding detail give so much play in the Torah? Let us analyze this story. As I said, that what you do, your work that you do, determine who you are. Our greatest leaders in the history of our people are always shepherds. They always shepherd animals. They always guide them into different places. And God is saying, if they can protect the animal with their own life, how much more my people? If Jacob can breed animals as a genetics, people think that genetics is from now. No, genetics has been from thousands of years. Jacob was the first genetics, according to the Torah. He was breeding these animals according to his likeness, according to the way he wants. And God, seeing what Jacob was doing, he said, no, this man, is a very, very intelligent man. He listened and he did exactly how he was commanded. And therefore, Jacob breeding the 12 tribes of Israel. Jacob worked 15 years for his father-in-law Laban. No matter how odiously he told, Laban constantly tried to deny Jacob compensation. Finally, he forced Jacob to accept a share in the sheep as wages, but only with certain stipulations. He will only compensate him with sheep that have mutation from the normal flocks. First, he says Jacob's wages to be paid with only spankled lambs that born of Jacob's flocks. Jacob, in a procedure that would have astonished even Gregor Mendel. I hope we know who Mendel was. Mendel was a man who discovered genetics according to what the scientists of now are saying, but they forgot about Jacob, who have already done it 5,000 or 3,000 years ago. Mendel, through his work on pear plants, discovered the fundamental law of inheritance. He deduced that genes come in pairs and are inherited as distinct units, one from each parent. Mendel tracked the segregation of parental genes and their appearance in the offspring as dominant or recessive traits. That was his work. It was a genetics. So, produce sheep exactly according to those specifications. Next, Laban allowed him stripped sheep. Again, miraculously, Jacob cultivated his flock God to produce a bounty of stripped sheep. The Torah repeats the episode in various colors and stripes. What could be the significance of its importance? Let us hear a particular little story. I want to give us a story. There is this Rabbi Aruel Levin, was once standing outside his yeshiva in Jerusalem while the children were on a 15-minute recess break. His son, Haim, a teacher in the yeshiva, was standing and observing what the children are doing. Suddenly, his father turned to him and he asked, "What do you see, my son?" asked Rabbi Aruel. The young rabbi, his son, said, "Why?" He answered, "The children are playing. See, they are playing. All of them are good, They are playing." Then the rabbi said, "Well," answered Rabbi Chaim, "David is standing near the door of the school with his hand in his pocket. He probably is no athlete. Moshe is playing widely. He's probably is undisciplined. He's running everywhere. And Yankel is analyzing how the clouds are drafting. I guess he was not counted in the game. But all in all, are just a bunch of children. They are all playing. Rabbi Aruel turned to him and exclaimed, "No, my son, you don't know how to watch the children." Why don't I know how to watch the children? I just explained to you what they are doing. Then the old rabbi said, "David is near the door with his hand in his pocket because he has no sweater, because he was feeling cold. His parents can't afford winter clothes for him. That is why you see him standing by the door with his hand in his pocket, because he's shivering. It's cold. Moshe is white because his rabbi scolded him and he is frustrated because he was cool, beating pa. You see, that's why you see him running like a white animal, because he's frustrated, he's annoyed. And Yankel is mopping because his mother is ill and he bears the responsibility to help the entire household. You see the Yankel that you think he was looking at the cloud? He's not looking at the cloud. He was thinking what he's going to do, how to help his parent who was here. In order to be a rabbi, you must know each boy's needs and make sure to give him the proper attention to fulfill those needs. This example taught me a lot of things when I read it. It taught me a lot of understanding. The same thing in the synagogue. Every member has a specific need. Every member has you cannot bring everybody as a bunch and put them in the same egg or in the same basket. No, there are a specific need for every member, and as a rabbi, you have to be able to design the specific need of every of your members. As parents, as we know that our children are not all the same. Each children has a specific need, and as parents, you have the understanding to understand the need of every child and to tailor your child according to their needs. The same thing in the house of God. The same thing in the synagogue. I have to know the need of every member, and I have to tailor every member according to his need. All of us were learning the Torah. All of us were the sons of God. But there is a specific need. My need is different from your need. Your need is different from her need. Her need is different from another person's need. We all have different needs. And so therefore, as a rabbi, my job is to focus, and my job is to study very hard to know the specific need of every member of the synagogue and to tailor myself according to their needs. Coming to the topic about Yehuda and Israel. Jacob had a very difficult task. His mission was to breed 12 tribes, each to be directed in a unique path. Some sons were to be a merchant, other scholars, while Judah was destined for royalty, while Levi was suited to be a teacher of the common faith. Each son, like each Israelite, had a special mission. Adonai needed a father for the 12 tribes who would not breed all his children in the same mood. In the same mode. If Moshe and David's destiny were determined by their care and compassion for their animal flocks, perhaps Jacob's development of 12 tribes was predetermined by his development of a wide array of his flocks. Only someone who knew how to cultivate unity in diversity would know how to produce the forebearer of the nation of Israel. Because Jacob knew how to breed animals. Because Jacob was a genetics. He knew how to breed a specific animal according to what he wants. So therefore, God made Jacob the forebearer, the forefathers of the 12 tribes of Israel. Jacob was able to breed every individual of his son differently. The 12 sons were not the same. Like some of our parents now want to put our children in the same basket. No. All of them are different. They are all born of, but their likeness is different. What this one like might be different from what this one like. What this one wants might be different from what this one wants. They all have different ways of life. We cannot force them on together to say you have to do everything the way the firstborn is born, or the way the secondborn, or the way the thirdborn. No, you have to tailor all your child individually. It's a custom-made thing. So Jacob was able to customize his son individually, because it's not all of them that is going to be kings. Because Yehuda was destined to be what? To be king. Levi is destined to be the teacher, where the Kohen Gadol comes from, to teach the whole people. Some are destined to be a merchant. Some are destined to be a banker, to be good in finance. While some are destined to be perfect in craft, like the tribe of Dan. According to the Torah said the tribe of Dan crafted the ark of the covenant. The temple, all the design were designed by the tribe of Dan. God give them the wisdom, the knowledge. So some of them are to be different. A contractor, a builder, a technician, engineers. All of them cannot be a doctor. All of them cannot be an engineer. All of them cannot be a lawyer. All of them cannot be a judge. No. Jacob was able to breed his children differently. And that is one of his specific tasks. It is a difficult task. It's very hard. But he did a good job as much as he can. Jacob understands genes perfectly well. Jacob understands DNA. And so therefore, it's the ladder that I saw is like a DNA. Looking at it picturally, if you twist it perfectly well, you can see DNA is like a ladder. As we climb up, and the Torah said, and Adonai was on top of the ladder. Right? So therefore, as far as we keep on climbing the ladder of righteousness, as far as we keep on climbing the ladder of holiness, we will meet God on top. God has called us individually into his kingdom. Israel is Israel, and among Israel we have the what? We have all the nations that came out with them from Mizraim. We have the Ararat that came out with them, and they all took their oath on Mount Sinai to follow the Torah. Moses said this commandment and this Torah, this covenant is for us that are here today, and for those that are haven't yet born, for those who are not here today, for our generations to come, forever, for eternity, until the world to come. It is a blood covenant. It is a covenant of life. We as the children of God, we as Jew, we as Israeli, we cannot afford to go to the world to come without the Torah. There's no any other way for us. Our way is the Torah. As Yeshua HaMashiach said, if we look at Luke chapter 15, I'd like to read that verse. It's very, very important. Luke chapter 15 from verse 11 to 32. Luke chapter 15 from verse 11 to 32. And Yeshua will say to them again. And Yeshua will say to them again, a certain man had 2 sons. And his younger son said to him, my father, give to me the portion that is coming to me from your estate. And he divided to them his possessions. And after a few days, the younger son gathered everything that was his share, and went away into a far country. And there he wasted his wealth while living lavishly. And when he had used up everything that he had, there was a great famine in that country, and he began to be in need. And he went and became acquainted with one of the sons of the city of the other country. And he set him in the field to tend swine. And he was carving to fill his stomach from those dung that those swine were eating. No man will give to him. And when he came to himself, he said, now, how many servants are there in my father's house, who have plenty of bread, and I am here with my hunger, and I am perishing? I will arise and go to my father's and say to him, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and therefore I am not worthy that I be called your son. Make me like one of your servants. And he arose and came to his father, and while he was far away, his father saw him and had compassion on him. And he ran and fell upon his neck and kissed him, and said to him, my son, my father, I have sinned. And said to him, his son, my father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and I am not worthy that I be called your son. But his father said to his servant, bring out the best robe and clothe him, and place a ring on his hand, and put shoe on him. And bring out and kill the ox that is fatting, and let us eat and be merry. For my son was dead, yet he lives. He was lost, yet is found. And they begin to marry. But he, the elder son, was in the field. And when he came and drew near to the house, he heard the sound of the singing of many. And he called to one of the boys and asked him, what is this? He said to him, your brother has come, and your father has killed the ox that was fatting, because he has received him back whole. And he was angry and did not desire to enter. And his father came out and beseeched him. But he said to his father, behold, how many years I have worked for you in service, and I have never transgressed your commandment. And during all this time you did not give me a goat to marry with my friends. And for this, while your son was wasted your wealth and among prostitutes, and has come home, you have slain the ox that was fattened for him. His father said to him, my son, you are with me at all times, and everything that is mine is yours. But it was right for us to make merry and to rejoice, because your brother was dead, yet he lived, and lost, yet was found. That story that Yeshua said was very fundamental in the life of the people of Israel. I want to give us a very clear understanding of this parable or metaphor that Yeshua said here. That son that was home with his father is Yehuda. Yehuda has been keeping the law of God from the beginning. The temple was in Jerusalem. They keep the law. But the 10 tribes, they departed from the way of God. They departed from the way of righteousness. And that is what we had in the Haftorah of this morning in the prophet Hosea. He said, Israel has gone away. They went and started bowing to the work of their own hands. They made a molten image, a calf, and they're bowing down onto a calf. Israel will face the consequence. God didn't say Judah. He said Israel. The 10 tribes, the northern tribes. They will face the consequence of their action. For they departed from me wickedly. And God is saying, you shall not depart from the Lord thy God wickedly. For he said, I brought you out from Israel. I brought you out from the land of the one. I brought you out from the land of Egypt. I was with you in the wilderness, in the desert. I provide everything for you that you need. Now you depart from me wickedly. And you serving the work of your hands. If we go back, for me to give you for me to give us a little hint, when the kingdom was divided between Jeroboam and Jeroboam, the son of Solomon, and the prince of Ephraim. Ephraim is the northern kingdom. That is Israel. The king of Israel did not allow the people to come to Jerusalem to worship. Why? It is politics. Because if they come to Jerusalem and be worshiping, who is it then? It's no king. Because the king, they will be bowed, he thinks in his head that the people of Israel will be bowing down to the king of Judea. And now the kingdom was divided. So he blocked them from coming to Jerusalem to serve God. Instead, he built a 2 temples. One in the north of his kingdom and one in the south of his kingdom. And he put a molten image, a calf. Just like the golden calf that they serve in the wilderness. He built a calf and put one in the north, one in the south, and direct his people to go and worship them. Wickedness before the Lord. And when God said, you shall not worship any graven image, you shall not worship any other idol except me, I am the Lord thy God. Because of politics, because of ego, because of I, he refuses the people from the north to come to the south to worship God in the temple in Jerusalem. These are always been the problem between the 2 kingdoms. We remember that Judah is senior to Ephraim. Ephraim is the son of Joseph. Joseph is younger than Judah. Judah is the senior. Ephraim is the younger one. Which is Joseph. Joseph is younger than Judah. Judah has kept the law all their life. But Ephraim went away in a far country. He took all his father's wealth and squandered it. And now he's hungry. He's thirsty. He said, because the prophet prophesied in Jeremiah and Ezekiel that the Lord will bring back the spies of Israel. God will bring them back home. But will Judah be happy that his brother is coming back home? Of course, Judah won't be happy. Judah is not happy that his brother is coming back home. Why? It's because he thinks in his head that I have kept the law of God all my life. And these my brothers, they did not keep the law. They squandered everything. And now they're coming back home. And God is receiving them with open hand. How about me that I've kept the law all my life? But Yeshua said, don't worry, Judah. Don't worry. All what Adonai has is yours. The temple is in Jerusalem. Don't worry. All what the Father has is yours. Don't jealous your brothers. Yes, your brother, they did wrong. They did what is evil before the sight of the Lord, and they face the consequence. We thank God for Judah. Because if not because of Judah, the Torah would have been destroyed a long time ago. If not because of Judah, there will be nothing like the faith of our fathers. The faith of our father will have been destroyed. But Judah was faithful and he stood firm, holding on onto the Torah. Yes, Judah has his own minuses. Judah has his own a little bit downfall, but not like Israel, his brothers. Anti-Semitism. An anti-Semite doesn't really care if a Jew or if an Israelite believes in God or not, or hold of the Torah from Sinai or reject the idea. He doesn't care. An Israelite may take note of this with respect to another Israelite, and a religious one may look at a non-religious one as being almost like a Gentile, but still is an Israelite. But a non-Israelite, especially an anti-Semitic one, put all Israelites into one and the same category, Israelite, and ascribe all the conspiracies and plot against the Christian world to the whole lot. All the conspiracy of Edom, which is Christianity, all the conspiracy of Christian world, they put upon all of us. They don't care. They put all Israelite in one basket. But an Israelite know who is who. But anti-Semite, someone who doesn't like, someone who is against the Jews, someone who hates Israel, someone who wants to see them destroyed, doesn't care. You put each and every one of us in the same basket. Understand, there are good ones and there are bad ones. But an anti-Semitic person put everybody in one basket. Then my mind went to the next level. The level of God. We all know the only way to get many Israel to live exile comfortably or painfully is through excessive anti-Semitism. At least that is the way it has worked for the past 3,500 years or so. Going all the way back to Yaakov Abenu in this week parasha. And he had the word of Laban, son, saying, Yaakov has taken all that belongs to our fathers, and from what belonged to our father he has amassed his entire fortune. And Yaakov saw Laban's countenance, that he was not disposed towards him as he has been yesterday and the day before. Bereshit chapter 31 verse 1 and 2. Anti-Semitism is a sign for us as Israelites, or for us as Jews. Anti-Semitism is a sign for us to wake up that it is time for us to go back home. Anti-Semitism, as evil as it might be, as negative as it might be, is a sign that God has been using from the past 3,500 years to bring us back home. That's the same way God used this anti-Semitism to bring Yaakov back, because Yaakov was comfortable in the house of Laban. Yaakov has a fortune. Yaakov became so super rich in the house of Laban, in the foreign land, in the land of Haran. But when anti-Semitism begins to rise, the Torah said, and Yaakov had the sons of Laban, saying, all the wealth of Laban as Yaakov taken. Yaakov got all his wealth from our father Laban. That is a sign. And the Torah said, and the continent of Laban has changed, because Yaakov has become very successful. Laban has planned to destroy Yaakov. He wants to use Yaakov as slave forever and ever. But all his plan, God turned them upside down. God turned his negative plan into positive for Yaakov. And Yaakov became very successful. Laban even himself confessed. He knew that yes, God is with him. That God has blessed him, Laban, because of Yaakov. And so therefore he doesn't want Yaakov to leave. He wants Yaakov to continue to remain in his house so that he can continue to enjoy the blessing of God. The truth is, this was not excessive anti-Semitism. It doesn't have to be. Yaakov was one of the few people who understood this, what it was and where it came from. He knew that as much as Laban and his sons couldn't stand him and had to restrain themselves from harming him, it was really God who was hand on the valve of anti-Semitism. What I'm saying is that it is God that have his hand on the valve of anti-Semitism. When it is time for God to open the valve, God opened the valve and all the people of the world begin to hate the Jews, and they begin to kill and destroy. What is that telling us? He's saying the time has come for you to leave. The time has come for you to return back home. The time has come for us to return back to our land, the land of Israel. In fact, that was exactly how Jacob knew that it was God who controlled the flow of hatred towards him. He was never fooled by the civil behavior of his father-in-law and brother-in-laws. He had no pretense about their motivations and plans, which is why he knew that God was one who had been keeping them at bay for the past 20 years. Therefore, when Jacob Abenu saw the civility begin to dissipate, he knew it wasn't just Laban having a bad day. It was Laban being himself, which meant that God was stepping back somewhat from overturning Laban's inherent hateful nature. Jacob comprehended that it means that history was at a turning point, and that it required a change in his own plan as well. So from here, Jacob has to make a change to his own plan. Maybe the plan of Jacob was to remain in Haran and enjoy himself, just like the way we are in Ethiopia. According to the writing, when we first came from Judea, we were the descendant of Kohanim, the descendant of the kings. We served the Ethiopian well. The king of Ethiopia were the chief advisor of the king. Everything in Ethiopia was done by the way of Israel, by the way of the Jews. But the time came when one of the kings converted into Christianity, and all has to convert into Christianity. And Beta Israel said, no, we will not convert. We are not Christian. We are Jews. Okay, if you don't want to convert, we kill you. They begin to kill. Some were converted. They called them the Falashe. But we didn't convert. They kill us and kill us and kill us. We ran down onto the mountain. We live in the land of Gandhara. It's a bitter history when you look at it. If you understand the blood vein that runs from your blood, that this is the history of my people, who they have slaughtered and killed for no reason in the name of their gods. That you have to convert. And we say, no, we are not Christian and we will not be Christian. You are Christian, be a Christian, there's no problem. Leave us alone. No, we will kill you. So you can see the bitterness for no reason. And that is what God is telling us. This is anti-Semitism. The time has come for you to leave. God is telling us, God is warning us. It's time to return home. You spend 2,500 years, you spend 2,700 years in Ethiopia. It is enough. The Ethiopian doesn't want you no more. Pack your load and leave. The same thing happened to Moshe Rabbeinu. In the Midrash, the Midrash said, and when Moshe left Mizraim, when Moshe left Egypt, people thought that he went directly to the city of Midian. No. The Midrash said that Moses went to Ethiopia and he was a king in Ethiopia. He helped the Ethiopian to capture a lot of vast territory. He arranged for Ethiopia a very strong army. But the time came when the Ethiopian said, Moshe, we don't need you again. We want one of our own to be our king. We don't need you. Pack your load and leave. So they pursued Moshe and they left him. And they sent him out of the land with his wife. And Moshe went to Midian. It's a midrash. But there is a truth about it. Because the Torah said, and Moshe's wife was an Ethiopian. An Ethiopian, by that time meaning a Cush, meaning a black woman. The continent of Africa is called the continent of Ethiopia. That was the original name of the continent. It's not Africa. The European gave it Africa. The name of the continent is called Ethiopia. That's the name of the entire continent. So we can see from where it is that the Torah said the truth. It never lied. So that's why I always tell us that the way to the kingdom of heaven, the way to the world to come for the Jews is only, or to all Israelites, is only through the Torah. However, it is possible Okay, so however it is possible that a people with such a tortured history can take that history so lightly. One of the main lessons of Beta Israel and the Holocaust is how a man can be so civilized and yet so murderous when it comes to the Jews or to the people of Israel. How can we turn our back on such an important survival message? How can we turn our back from such an history that my people have experienced? How can we just take it so lightly and say, okay, it's good? And we can see in Europe, in France, for example, the high level of anti-Semitism that is happening now. They have to leave. The French doesn't want to see them again. What is God is telling us? The time of the second coming of the Son of Man is at hand. You have to pack your load and leave. In England, it's the same thing. In Africa, we are seeing the same thing. In North America, the Jews there were still relaxing, enjoying ourselves. Oh, this place is good. We're not living anytime soon. But believe you or me, very soon the same thing is going to be happening here. The people will rise up and they will say, "You, the Jews, are causing trouble. You, the Jews, are the one that is causing our economy to crumble. You, the Jews, are the source of all evil. Pack your load and leave." And if we don't want to leave, we will leave with force. And if we want to leave with force, it's going to be by death. Just the way it happened during the Second World War. It's a message that God is telling us. It's a message that the Holy One is that I, the living God, have my hand upon the tap of anti-Semitism. When it is time for me to return you back home, because it said, and I'm going to bring them from all four corners of the earth, and I will bring them to the mountain of Israel. I will bring them back to their own land, to their own home, and they will dwell there safely, securely. So when God has decided, it is time. It is time. And how does God do that? Because we the Jews, we Israelites, we are so used to what? To comfortability. I don't want to go to that desert. That Israel is a desert, where there's no rain, no snow, all the 40 degrees centigrade. No. I better remain here where it's nice, the temperature is good, everything is fantastic. But that is your home, that is your land. You have no choice than to return back, because the covenant that we made is a covenant of life. Most secular Israelites just take a look at history. Secular Israelites may distance themselves from their religious brothers and sisters, but the anti-Semites of history haven't. An Israelite is an Israelite. They continue to say they don't care. They put everybody in the same basket. When the Christian reporter called it an Israeli or a Jewish coup against the President Trump, he did not make a point of distinguishing which of the Jews, which of the Israelites he's talking about. But because in his mind, all of us are one. He's not alone. We are also all the same in God's mind, so to speak. In time of halacha capability, it will depend upon what a person could have known about the Torah but didn't. But in time of who belongs to his nation, it is all of us, and we really have no way short of prophecy to know who belongs more than whom. This is why when they have to come for us, they have come for all of us altogether. They don't come on behalf of themselves as much as they think they do. God will deal with them for who they are and what they do. But let that not cloud the absolute reality. Anti-Semitism is not a form of racism. It is a means of divine communication. When it happens, we are best to give on our ears to God, not to the anti-Semite. But when it gets to the point when we have to watch out for them, it's because we didn't turn our ears to God when we should have, as Jacob, our father, did in this week's parasha. Jacob, our father, did listen to God, and he understood perfectly well that if I overstay my place or if I overstay my stay in Haran, God will not protect me. It is not going to be the fault of God, it's going to be my fault. I will repeat again. If when God begins to do what, open the tap of anti-Semitism against Jacob, Jacob understood. He knew that his father-in-law Laban is planning evil against him, and the sons of Laban, they don't want to see him at all. They hate him because they thought he has acquired all his fortune through their father, and that is not true. If their father was a thief who wanted to deceive a deceiver, so both of them are thieves. A deceiver deceiving a deceiver. But we understood that Jacob acquired all his wealth perfectly well by hard work. His father-in-law wanted to cheat him, and he refused to be cheated. He said no. He cheated him with his first with his children. The first, instead of giving him Rahel, he gave Leah. He has to work again. Then, okay, let me work. Okay, I'm going to pay you. Okay, I'm going to pay you with the one with spot. Then he saw that all the sheep are increasing. He said, no. I'm going to pay you with the sheep that has a stripe. And Jacob breed another one again that has a stripes. And all the sheep are the sheep of Jacob. You see? So Jacob understood that this hatred that Laban has for me is not ordinary hatred, it's from God. God is telling me to leave. If I don't leave, if anything happens, it's not the fault of God, it's my fault, because I am too wanton-eyed. I'm too comfortable here. I want to remain here in Haran. No, you cannot remain in Haran. If anything happens to you in Haran, it is your fault. If anything happens to any Israelite or Jews in North America, when the time will come, it's going to be our fault, not the fault of God. Because God is telling us it's time to pack and leave. Because we love comfortability. The type of house, I don't know how many of you have been to Israel. The type of house that Israel is not the type of house that we have in North America, right? Here in North America, the houses are huge, so big, right? Big apartment, big everything, you know. But in Israel, everything is tiny. Oh, say, how can I come and live in this tiny hole? I can't come and live in this tiny place. No, it's too tiny for me. You know, I need enjoyment. I need to feel comfortable. The work of God is not about comfortability, but it's about the love that you have for the Torah. The Torah is a hard work. The Torah is a yoke. If you carry it, God will give you the energy, the strength. He will bless you. But if you say, no, I don't want to carry the yoke of the Torah, then when the consequence comes, don't blame God. Don't blame yourself. Because remember that you, me, our forefathers took an oath upon the mountain. On the mountain on that day, and the yoke and the covenant was made by blood, was made by life. So we have no way out and for to carry the yoke of the Torah. Those Israelites or those Jews who are liberal want to be liberal, who want to say no, it doesn't matter no more. That is the Old Testament, where Yeshua said that none of the word of the Torah will go without being fulfilled. That even though if the heavens and earth pass away, let all the physical universe be destroyed, the Torah, not a single dot, a single alphabet will go without being fulfilled. And people come and tell you that Yeshua come to destroy the Torah. Where is it? So I've come to fulfill, to make it right, to bring Israel back into the covenant of their forefathers, the covenant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to reunite back together the two kingdoms, to bring the northern kingdom back to the southern kingdom. But the northern kingdom has to understand they have to make a teshuvah, as Yeshua said here, that and the son came to himself. The man, the boy, the son came into himself, came to his own reality. He has been living a life of fantasy for thousands of years. He has to come back to the reality that in my father's house there are servants who enjoy more than me. Why am I here in exile, suffering? Why am I here in exile, hungry? Why am I here in exile, open to the elements? Why am I here in exile without no shelter? What is wrong with me? What is wrong with me? In my father's house there are many mansions. Why am I tossed? Why am I like this? We have to make a teshuvah. We have to return home. We have to go to our father and beg him and tell him, please, we have done wrong. We did what is evil in your sight. We worship the golden calf. We worship the golden idols. Forgive us. We are ready to come back home. Then our father will receive us with open hand. Remember, our father is a God of compassion. He's a father of enormous compassion. He said his compassion, his rahami, can never be measured. He goes to the deepest of the deepest of the deepest place. Our God is a God of mercy. He's a God of compassion. So what do you learn from this parasha today? Please, let's come back home. No matter how far we have gone in the world, no matter how we have spent our wealth, and for those who are watching on the internet, the same thing. God is calling us home. Let's come back home. Let's concentrate our mind to return to the covenant of our fathers, the covenant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. As the Lord God, as we made that covenant on the month of on Sinai, on the day that we said yes, we will do it. We confirm with our mouth, with our everything that yes, all what God had said we will do. All what God had said we are going to perform and do. Let's return back home. Let's take the Torah up again and carry the yoke of the Torah to the ends of the world, because it is through us that the whole world will be blessed. Thank you so much, and may the Lord, the living God, bless you. Parasha Vayetze.